The Accessibility Breakdown by Inclusion Impact Accessibility.
Hey, welcome to the Accessibility Breakdown. I am Mark, and this is
Justin.
You always just are a slight delay, Justin. Every week we pay tribute to those that stand out to us as leading by accessibility by picking 3 topics that strike us in some way. This week, we're going to talk about a simple way to make instructions more accessible. This is an article by Josh Crawford. Again, one of those subjects that we've probably come around to, but I really felt this was a good reminder and some interesting things that Josh talked about. We're also going to talk about increasing accessibility, mindfulness-based practices for autistic folks, and this is written by Brett. You got to help me with his last name. Albanese?
Albanese?
Albanese? Thank you. Boy, you're just much better at that than
Albanese.
I am. Albanese. Brett Albanese. And as we know, this is, or as you may or may not know, this is Autism Awareness Month. So this article is really timely for that. And it also has some personal connections, particularly for Justin, but I think for all of us. So we're excited to do that one. And then the other thing we're going to talk about today is there's a really interesting story out of my home state, New Hampshire. And we're going to be talking about this young student, Ben, whose deaf, felt isolated at school, and the incredible sort of community story that unfolds from there. So we'll talk about that. We'll give you more details on that when we get to it. So Justin, let's start with a simple way to make instructions more accessible.
Yeah. So this was an interesting article. I mean, this comes up a lot, but this is one of those articles that's very simple to understand, very easy to kind of get into. And the number of times that I have to reference color alone being an issue, or position, like people referencing like specific positions, it comes up all the time. I almost got ready to say a potty word there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it comes up all the time. And so having just a simple set of instructions to remind everyone it's needed. Even in this day and age, we've got AI, we've got all these things that are helping us out. And but just some simple instructions on like not relying on sight alone. Or if you do rely on sight, like saying like, hey, don't, click the button to the left, or, the button is available at the top, in the top right corner. Like, people who are unsighted, or people maybe that are low vision, that have changed the shape of their screen in some way, maybe they're zooming in or something.
Right.
Those types of waypoints, this type of directional advice isn't going to be as useful for them as it is for someone who is, fully sighted and can kind of scan the page. So.
Yeah, articles like this for me, Justin, one of the reasons why I like them is because they are, like, you kind of brought up the point that it's like, I don't know how you stated it, but that this isn't like a big complicated issue. It's not a new, like, trenchant AI thing. Goes back to sort of the basics for accessibility. And I think sometimes, one, it's a very human issue, right? And I think it becomes difficult. It's a good example of how it can be difficult for anything that is automated, AI or whatever, to parse something well enough to be like, this instruction is not good because of, you're saying this is over to the right, but it could be reordered, or somebody with a screen reader is not going to understand, because screen readers present the page linearly, where you're viewing like this two-dimensional view of the page. Directions like right make sense in that context, but when you're listening or experiencing a linear version of the page, that doesn't make sense, right? And so I think it becomes really difficult to it's very human, right, for automation to do it. And the other thing that I really like about this is me being on the phone with people who, like, I think when you're on the phone with somebody, right, when you're doing your job, Justin, because you're so technical, you're often talking to other people that are technical, right? That would be your experience back in TPGI, right? You're surrounded, you're in this in this group of technical folks. Whereas I may be in that kind of conversation, but I'm oftentimes in a group of people who may not have known what accessibility was, or maybe they kind of understand a screen reader, but not really, or didn't know what one was a little while ago. And to have these very understandable examples, and I think this is understandable. So I go like, oh, an image doesn't describe, a screen reader can't describe an image, so you need alt text. Like that's something a layperson can understand. And then lots of times I'll go into form fields. Like you may have a bunch of, that you have to put your first name in this form because like first name is right next to the form field and last name is right next to the form field and so on. But it doesn't mean it reads it out to the screen reader in that order. So imagine it said first name, last name, address, form field, form field, form field. You wouldn't know what to do. So there's a couple of these examples. And I think this is another one. And I don't use this one, but maybe I'm going to start. But and we all deal with directions of one type or another every day. So this idea that yes, in some environments, click the button on the right makes sense. In other environments, or I shouldn't even say in environments, but in the environments that people need to navigate, it may not make sense. So if the environment you're trying to navigate is one of a screen reader, that may not make sense. So I really appreciated Josh's explanation of this. So read the article if you haven't, and I really appreciate the fact that it does bring the importance of accessibility kind of to the surface where it's understandable by a lot of folks. I don't know. That was mine.
No, it is. And it's interesting, like as you were kind of talking, like one of the analogy, I'm a big analogy person. And it's almost every email client these days has the way to remind you to actually attach an attachment to a file. If you say like, hey, in this file below, blah, 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 blah. But if you go to send it and you click send and it's like, hey, you mentioned an attachment. Did you forget to, because no one likes having to send that second email.
That saved my life quite a few times. Thank you very much.
Well, wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if you were like, if you're working on a document or you're working particularly like in a PowerPoint presentation or something like that, and you had some way of being able to see like, hey, refer to all of the red items. And, if you're colorblind, you may not be able to see the red items. That's why we have like contrast issues and color alone as a success criteria. And wouldn't it be cool if like you had something similar to the attachment reminder that said like, hey, you've got phrasing in here, or you are using color alone or position in order to indicate where something is on the screen. I mean, it's an accessibility check, but it kind of falls in that kind of similar vein.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like you could alert that. You could say you're using directional or positioning. Are you sure that that's going to be perceivable by everyone? And then the problem with that too is that like if you're a layperson and you're trying to get accessibility right, and then all of a sudden you get that level of feedback, you may not get it. Right? You may be like, what do you mean? I don't understand. But that's where Josh's article, I think, comes in to play, is that if part of that person's education was what Josh put together here and the kind of checklist that he brings forward, then all of a sudden like, oh, okay, that kind of alert would be very, very useful, followed up by the information in this article. So I agree. And we should just cover a little bit like what Josh Crawford says in this article is essentially like, you need to use non-positioning language. So if there's a button to be pressed, and I'm going to forget the exact example that he did, but it needs to say like press the submit button versus press the button on the right. Yeah. So labeling it, and we know labeling and is a big in sort of all sorts of different contexts is a big deal when it comes to accessibility. But having that button have a name, have a label, and being able to refer to that versus its position on the page is essentially, in a nutshell, the way to think about it.
Yeah.
We good?
We good.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate the article. All right. So the next one here that we wanted to talk about was this article by, I'm going to say the first name, you say the last name, Brett
Albanese.
Thank you. And it's increasing accessibility, Mindfulness-Based Practices for Autistic Folks. And like I said at the top, we're excited to have this article to talk about because it is Autism Awareness Month, and which is an important month because I think it's, and we'll talk a little bit about it today, but just the autism awareness means a lot of different things to me, and I'm sure it means even more to you, Justin. But essentially, this was a little bit close to me too, because I'm a big mindfulness person. That's what I was about to say. I practice mindfulness like a lot of other folks. And what people don't realize about mindfulness, I think, is that it can be, I don't know if I'm using the right word here, but you have to approach it with caution, right? It can sort of be dangerous and destructive. And we're going to talk a little bit about some mental health things here as well, or at least I am. So just a fair warning, if that's a trigger for you, you might want to fast forward a little bit here. But for people with mental health issues, diving into mindfulness can be a little bit difficult and dangerous because all of a sudden you're quietly dealing with some difficult thoughts. And it does not necessarily, mindfulness isn't magic, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to deal with those thoughts well. So in this article with autism, they sort of talk about how difficult it could be for an autistic person to fold inward like that. And this is my words here. And the really interesting thing, and you have some experience with this, Justin, so I'm gonna be quiet and let you talk about it. But the really interesting thing is that you don't believe me that I'm gonna be quiet in a minute. You're like, sure you are. We need a signal where you just tell me to shut up and let you talk. But anyways, and I'm playing with a bottle. This is appropriate because I'm playing with a little fidget thing that I have sitting on my desk. I have several of them over here. But one of the things they said is that sometimes to anchor, again, my words, but to anchor that person with autism, sometimes they need some sort of external stimuli, and that may be a fidget toy to kind of, in my mind, it was to sort of ground them in the presence a little bit in a different way, other than just relying on their mind to hold them in the present moment, which is what a mindfulness is, or one type of mindfulness is about, is really holding your mind in the present moment. So so it's just very interesting. I'd never thought about that, and I think that we learn a lot from the different ways people think, and this really struck me as interesting, and I started to think of curb cut out, like how can I learn from this alternative mind that's not the same as mine. But I'm going to flip it over to you, Justin, for realsies this time, because you have some specific experience with this.
Yeah. For those that don't know me personally, like I have my oldest son is on the spectrum. He's ADHD, which is autism plus attention hyperactivity ADHD. He has all of the things. Yeah. But like when he was in therapy, they used this method of kind of external stimuli in order really to kind of quiet some of the other parts of his brain and allow them to have a conversation. And I remember when he first started going, it was weird for me. So his big thing, he's always been a big screens kid, but one of the things that he's really gotten into over the past couple of years is composing. And so he will spend a lot of time on his phone composing music, and like note by note, not in GarageBand or anything like that. He uses like this little MIDI synthesizer, but that's his fidget. That's his way to kind of quiet like his brain to focus in on something. And so it was weird to me when he would go into his sessions and they'd be like, no, it's okay. I can bring my phone. I'm supposed to. And I didn't understand it until it was explained to me what they were using it for. And so he would go in and he would work on a song while his therapist would ask him questions and stuff like that. Yep. And so, sometimes she kind of has to, ask multiple times, but it helps. It gave them a much more productive session, a much more way for him to be mindful of the moment and to talk about some of the things that he needed to talk about in those sessions. So that was one way that helped him. But as that article that we read, that we're publishing from Albanese, they are, this may not work for everyone. But we had some success with it, and it was really cool. And so it was kind of, I didn't know that was, I thought that was just kind of a technique that his therapist had stumbled upon, or I didn't realize that was like a real thing. So it was cool to read.
So this is where the curb cutout effect, I think, comes in, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning that your experience with your son, this article exposes this notion that sometimes what seems to be a distraction is actually a tool to focus. And it seems like in the case of people who are autistic, that I'm sure not in every case, but that in some of these cases, that's the method. And I'll say a couple things about that. One, so I'm on the opposite end of the autistic spectrum. In some models, autism is on one end of the spectrum. You have sort of a normative middle, and then dyslexia is on the other end. And the reason why it's laid out that way is because dyslexia can be simply defined is if you're looking at the trouble it causes, right, versus the beneficial ways it helps. It's difficulty sort of getting into the details, right? So people with dyslexia tend to be pretty good with storytelling, but they're very bad at spelling. So it's that detail. Big picture, great detail. And this is simplistic one aspect here, so don't get too bit of it. Whereas with autism, oftentimes you have the opposite occur, where you've got the people with autism who hear a song and then can play it note for note, right? Because they're sharp in those details, but maybe they struggle socially because they're harder navigating that big picture, right? And again, this is me editorializing, so if you've got different experiences, don't beat me up here. But I have dyslexia and I have ADD. And one of the things I often do is I listen to a podcast when I'm trying to stay focused on a simpler task, one that's sort of more repetitive, because it keeps me focused. And because of this experience, I had an employee who was on the autistic spectrum, and they were worried one day because I had made a comment that exposed the fact that they weren't looking at the camera and that they were doing something. They were fidgeting below them, and what they were doing was doodling. And they went into a panic because of past experiences with managers who had accused them of not paying attention in a similar situation. And they were like, "Oh, it'll never happen again, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Hold up, what were you doing?" And they said, "I was doodling." And I said, "That's what I thought you were doing." And I said, "And I assumed you were doing it to hold your attention on the conversation." And they said, "That's exactly what I was doing." The person was almost surprised. And then we had a great conversation about it. It ended up being a great moment and a great opportunity to understand each other and all that kind of thing. But so the question is like, what other ways is that similar experience helpful to all sorts of people? I value it as somebody on the opposite end of that spectrum. And then also just to hold in our heads this idea that people's brains work differently, and we can't assume our experience is the same as somebody else's experience. And what I wanted to do, Justin, because we're digital accessibility people, and I think people listening to this podcast might be like, okay, what does this have to do with digital accessibility? And one of the things that struck me, right, we pick out things that strike us. One of the things that struck me is why it is important that we keep focusing on how we do create rules around what's the word I'm looking for? The
cognitive,
neurodivergent.
Okay.
Neurodivergence in terms of like the wiki. It's one of the areas in digital accessibility I think is the hardest that probably have not gotten as far down the road. Like if we're for people who are blind, for people who are deaf, it's a little easier to understand how to accommodate, but we've struggled trying to figure out how to accommodate for people who are neurodivergent. And it just highlights the things that we do have, like distractions on the site. And because somebody fidgets to stay focused doesn't mean that the flashing lights in the ad off to the side are going to help, right? Those are probably going to be a distraction, or the fact that we need to write, create sites that are consistent from page to page to page. Yeah. Because of this difficulty of focusing. So to me, it just sort of highlighted the importance, one, that we keep exploring how to do this, and two, the things that we do have in place are very, very important. I think, or the things that we do understand right now are very, very important.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we could go on. I could go on. I've got more stories, but we're gonna, in the interest of time, let's move. I know Justin's like, I'm the one with the kid who's got autism.
No,
You're the one that
no, you were the storyteller. So
that's right. I'm the story. That's right. Respect my my dyslexia. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I love this next story. I absolutely love it. And I love it to the point where I don't know what to do with it, right? Because I want to do something with it. And it is, so your comment to me before we got on and heated up the mics was because I gave this to you to read, and you were like, oh, that's just dust in my eye, right? It is that kind of story where it feels so good and it gives you so much faith.
Yep. This is one of those, like, for anyone that watches like CBS Sunday Morning, like this is one of those like feel good kind of like stories that you're like, it's narrated in a very calm, soothing voice.
Yeah, and listen, this is not adults here. This is children being better leaders, being naturally just gravitating towards what's right in a way that I think as we get older, our adults can struggle with. So I'm not going to delay any further. So this comes out of my home state, New Hampshire, and this is a story. It was covered by a bunch of people. We'll probably link you out to the CBS News article on it. And it's from Campton, New Hampshire. So Campton Elementary School. And this young man named Ben, and I just wrote Ben down, so we probably should, Ben O'Reilly. O'Reilly's his last name, who's deaf, and he's mainstreamed, which means he's put into the education system with other students. So in this small New Hampshire town, he's the only deaf student, and he has this wonderful aide, Cheryl. I can't do the last name. Ulicny. This is my thing. No last name, Mark.
Olik.
And Ben started to kind of express, as you would expect, like feelings of isolation. It's it's difficult. There's no way around it, right? Like if you're the only deaf student in a school full of hearing people, there's going to be challenges. And I think that, and this is me reading into this, but I think that there's a lot of credit given to Cheryl here for really working with Ben and being a great advocate and friend and everything. But the story here is that unprompted, Ben's classmates started to learn sign language and started to sign with Ben. And they started when you like, I've looked at some of the interviews online that people recorded with these kids, and they're like, well, if you want to play with Ben, you need to know how to talk to Ben. And we wanted to play with Ben. He's, like, and I'm like, I'm not, this is not verbatim, but they're saying things like Ben was our friend and we wanted to play with him. And so we learned sign language. Like just as a matter of fact is it could be. And it's so simple. It is so simple. But Ben was in an environment where he was struggling. The people in that environment were welcoming and perceived the barrier that Ben had and was perceiving, and worked with Ben to close it.
Yeah.
Like
kids are amazing. And
kids are amazing.
Yeah. I don't know. Kids are one of the, I feel like we're the ones that kind of screw up kids long term by projecting our own kind of things onto them. But kids themselves, like you put like two kids in a room, like they just want to play with each other. They want to do things with each other, you know. It's and you know, they want to communicate the way that kids do. Um
Well,
and that's really
yeah,
that's what I took away from this
and
from the
sometimes
story
I think
was
we need to
how
look.
awesome it was.
Yeah, and
Because then
sometimes I
it
think we need
spread.
to. Sometimes I think we need to look back to our kids and realize that they can lead us as much as we feel responsible for leading them all the time. That sometimes
Yeah.
if we are open to that and we look back, and I know that that's very difficult as an adult to do. But so a couple of things here. One, I want to say, like, in a world where we talk about Title II of the ADA, Title III of the ADA, Section 508, EAA, and we need to become accessible because we need to conform with these things. And that's the way the world works, right? There's no judgment there. It is refreshing for that simplicity of Ben needs to be included in what we're doing, and we're going to learn sign language. And we're not, and there was no meeting, Justin, right? These kids didn't
Yeah.
meet and decide this. They just started doing it. It just was the path. And then here's the really cool thing, right? Like Billy Mays, right? Like, but wait, there's more.
Mhm.
The school, and this is a huge credit, Campton Elementary, to you all, is the school and the adults in the school, none of this got past them. They saw what was happening and they took that leadership from the kids. And even in assemblies and events and things where Ben wasn't present, the school, the adults started signing because the kids were signing, and the kids were signing with each other when Ben wasn't around. And so even this requirement that Ben be there and that we do this for Ben, that faded into the background. And they, in the requirement to use American Sign Language, requirement's not even the right word, but the desire to use American Sign Language and the desire
Yeah.
to practice American Sign Language and to desire to be a community that can come together and learn to communicate with one in a way that one individual in the community needs it was incredible. And then just, you know, if you just think about how enriching that is to the kids and their learning. And, you know, at CSUN, I sat down with a friend of mine who's deaf and I signed just so people understand. I'm not great at it, but I have what I'll call a level of fluency. And I probably had a better level of fluency back a while ago when I was more saturated. And one of the things that we talked about is how how uncomfortable people are when a person is in the room that only uses sign language. So I'm not talking about a person who's deaf with who can also speak well and read lips well, or has a cochlear implant, or has, is hard of hearing, can hear. Like there's the kind of this middle ground where it's effective. They can sort of those people can be more effective at integrating into the hearing community. And it's not, I don't mean that as their responsibility. I mean the hearing community more easily accepts them. And we have friends that are like that too. But the more you rely solely on American Sign Language to communicate, the more difficult it is to be accepted into a group of people who are hearing, right? So the conversation that me and my friend who's deaf, Greg, shout out Greg, we're having was how do we start to speak to the community and bridge that gap? And then I turn around and the little kids at Campton Elementary School just did it. They just did it without a discussion, without prompting. So anyways, hugely proud of those kids in that school. And
yeah. And you can totally like envision like how it happened. Like maybe two or three kids were like, "Hey, we're gonna do this thing," and then some other kids saw them doing it, and they're like, "I want to learn how to do that." You know, I mean,
well,
and it
kids
just
mimic.
grew. Kids mimic, and they're
Yeah.
so good at it.
And I'm absolutely sure that when Cheryl and Ben were signing, some kid caught that out of the corner of his eye, and when he was playing on the ground, Legos or blocks or trucks or whatever they're playing, I don't know,
Mhm.
that either Ben signed or the kid picked up a sign from Ben and Cheryl. Something happened where one of the kids was like, I got this. I saw this. I picked it up, because they're sponges at that age. And it went from there.
Yeah. Good story.
So, yeah, it's a great, great story. And yeah, just learn from our kids. That's our three stories. That's our three stories, Justin. And do you have any final thoughts before we?
No, but it's funny. For some reason, a lot of my social media recently has been including, probably just from the conversations you and I have been including a lot more like sign language and stuff. From Instagram. There's a woman on Instagram who does the sign language for like heavy metal songs and stuff.
Love that.
Which is really cool to watch. Like I think a lot of people have seen like the videos of like the sign languages, people doing sign language at like rap concerts and stuff like that. But I'm sure this conversation, because our phones are always listening, is probably going to just even bring in more of that to my feed. So I'm excited to see that.
Nothing wrong with heavy metal sign language.
It's
I love
cool.
stuff like that too, because it just injects some fun into everything. Sign language is really fun to learn. So I will shameless plug, like go learn it. And I've got a friend in Florida. So if you're in Florida, look up Courtney Cannon, and I'll post a link in this podcast. But she does a lot for the community. I think we mentioned her a few podcasts ago, but she does a lot for the community down there. And I'm struggling. I think she's in Orlando. I think it's Orlando. And teaching people sign language, So, and then there's some great content online. There's some great apps. So maybe I'll gather up some resources and throw them in here as well, just for if anybody wants to start. And it's the kind of thing, like, start off with a few signs. You don't have to know, you don't need to be fluent. Start off with a few signs. Any step towards accessibility and communication and stuff like that is a great one, and people appreciate it. People appreciate it. So keep heavy metal signing, Justin.
Yeah.
And I need that. That's a good follow. I need that follow from you as well.
Oh, I sent it to you.
Oh, did you? All right, maybe we'll post that as well. All right. Well, listen, we hope that we've honored those that are honoring accessibility. And now that we've broken down accessibility for you, you can help others by keeping it accessible.
Thank you for listening to the Accessibility Breakdown by Inclusion Impact Accessibility.